schools, how important the Saturday community language schools is on young Australians like yourself and myself. So thank you very much. Next, we'll be hearing from Professor Liam Morgan. Professor Morgan is a senior lecturer in the field of language and literacy, coordinator of the Language Other Than English program, and holds a Bachelor of Teaching in Secondary Education degree. Today, he will outline some recent research into language teaching and give you some new ways of looking at your teaching and the students you teach. Thuyết trình gia tiếp theo mà chúng ta được nghe là giáo sư Liam Morgan. Giáo sư Morgan là giảng sư đại học trong lĩnh vực ngôn ngữ và là điều hợp viên của chương trình ngôn ngữ ngoài Anh ngữ với bằng cử nhân sư phạm bậc trung học. Hôm nay giáo sư Morgan sẽ trình bày những chương trình nghiên cứu mới nhất trong lĩnh vực dạy ngôn ngữ và giúp chúng ta có một cái nhìn mới về phương pháp giảng dạy cũng như học sinh được thụ huấn. Xin trân trọng kính mời giáo sư.
Good morning, everyone. And I have to really acknowledge your energy and enthusiasm. When I came into this room, it was just so infectious to see the joy and happiness about being a language teacher and being here at this conference on a Sunday morning. So thank you very much for that, for lifting me up. I'm going to be talking to you today about your schools and community language schools, and I'm drawing on three research experiences. One is with Ken Cruikshank, who wanted to be here but couldn't, and he sends his apologies. He was leading our team researching community language schools and languages in schools, and a project called Maximising Australia's Languages. The other research that's probably less well known, and I know that Criss Jones Diaz is going to be talking to you later, was research that I did with Criss and Ken actually on playgroups, on the importance of home language being maintained in the playgroup area, that is in young children before school. And the third area of knowledge, if you like, that I bring is my research as a researcher in language development, the general area of why people should learn a language and what happens when people are learning another language and why bilingualism is good. So they're the three areas that inform today's talk. First, I want to just go over some things that you already know, I'm sure. And that is, first of all, that you represent the third most important language in New South Wales. So in our DET schools, Vietnamese has a very significant presence among the student body. 15,709, so out of the total students, which is about 6-7% of the total. A very significant community language, a very significant presence in our community and in our schools. I'll read these out for you in case you can't see them, but basically what that's telling us, this is from the Department of Education's website, that in our schools, in our primary schools, about 6% of those students who speak a language additional to English are Vietnamese, and about 7% in the secondary area of those students who speak a language additional to English, 7% of those students are Vietnamese background. When we look at what's going on in the formal area in mainstream schools, we see that in the K-6 area in 2015, this is from the Department of Education schools again, not your schools, importantly, this is the DET schools in Monday to Friday. About 4,794 students are pursuing a study of Vietnamese. One third only of the identified enrolments in that area are studying Vietnamese. When you get to secondary school, the situation is much worse. In the, what you see there are the 100 hours, that is the compulsory languages in high schools. Only 65, two classes of children are doing their Vietnamese in the 100 hours. One of the things that we're researching is actually what is being taught in the 100 hours. Is it reflecting the community, or is it reflecting just who's in the school? Which teachers are in the school, which resources are there? Very important question. And then when you get to the HSC, 144 students doing the Vietnamese. So the point that I'm gradually getting to is that the community language schools aren't just filling the gap. They're actually doing the main work. You are doing the main lifting in terms of maintaining students' language. And I was really inspired with Tanya's talk. I did understand some things. One of the things that I did understand was above and beyond. And that's really reflects the work that community language teachers do. When we go and visit schools, and I visited the Vietnamese school out of Bankstown for our research and stayed there for quite a while. We see teachers transforming that space into a Vietnamese school before the students even arrive. We see parents coming in to support, but we see students giving up their time and energy to pursue the language, and teachers giving up their time and energy to support those students in their project of maintaining their home language, which is such an important project, not just for them, but for our country as a whole. The work that you do is like this treasure, this national treasure that Australia has, that is being looked after and added to like an investment. So you are the keepers of a very important treasure for our country. And I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that. It's really important what you're doing. That strength of identity that your children grow up with is a major asset to this country. Anyway, back to the research. We know that the Vietnamese community is a large, low-shift community language. That means that Vietnamese communities tend to hang on to their language. They don't lose it, unlike some other communities. It's the fifth language after spoken in Australia and the third language after English in New South Wales, if you count Mandarin and Cantonese as broadly as a Chinese language. There's little shift to English in the first generation, only about 3.2%, and fairly moderate shift in the second generation, but in common with other languages, the problem is the third and fourth generation, maintaining that language after that. We are looking in our research with Ken in the Maximising Australia's Language project, we're looking at how effective the schools are and researching the importance of maintaining and development of Vietnamese, and also carrying out the possible future issues for the community language schools and the Vietnamese schools in particular. One of the questions we're asking teachers and principals when we go into schools is, are parents asking you for advice? What advice do you give them? And what we're finding, not on your part, but on the part of parents, there's some uncertainty about whether they should be using English or the home language in the home. Parents want to know, is it all right to use Vietnamese all the time? Yes, the answer is yes, and you know that. But parents are often asking that. And one of the roles, your roles in the community languages sector, is giving parents that really good advice about using Vietnamese in the home and the value of raising your children bilingually. So many parents are worried that if their children learn Vietnamese, it might interfere with with the development of their English. No. Teachers often get asked by parents what to do, and many parents also take their children out of school in later primary school, often because they're attending other classes, and this is what we call the selective school dropout, and that is when they're doing cram school or other activities and they don't have time for their community language school anymore. And so it's a really important question to address with your parents, should children be raised with two languages? We know that all the research tells us that yes, bilingualism is great, that young bilingual children can distinguish between form and content, they have better problem-solving skills and better metacognitive skills, that is, they're better able to think about their own thinking and articulate their own thinking. Psycholinguistic studies have shown that young bilingual children are able to differentiate between form and content in a disciplined way, and for example, they know that names for things are different in other languages. So when confronted with like the word for a new word of vocabulary, they're not fazed by it, they understand the system, and they're able to imagine that, okay, in another country, this word means this. And that's a really important skill, a really important cognitive skill that they develop right from a very young age. Because bilingual children grow up with two or more languages, sets of representational symbols, they develop thinking patterns different to those of monolingual children. They can separate information and they can synthesize information. They're constantly switching between language. They develop more flexible problem-solving strategies. And they're more likely than monolingual children to try a different strategy when one strategy fails. In other words, their thinking is more flexible and they're less fazed by things that they don't know. In terms of the brain, bilingual children have larger grey and white matter in their brain. That is, more storage of information, more connections between the parts of the brain. Bilingual children may take longer than monolinguals to acquire vocabulary in English because they're learning double the load. And that's often something that parents report, oh, my child's not speaking so well, or my child's not speaking English so well, or my child is silent for a while. And that's because they're processing two languages. They catch up very quickly. And it's important that we don't give up on that project of bilingualism because of that silence that we might sometimes encounter. By the time children's cognitive development catches up, in years, by the time they're 4, 5, 6, they're catching up and they're going beyond their peers. And importantly for people like me, it's known that language learning delays the onset of dementia by an average of 4 years, so that gives me a little while. No, it's true, it keeps your mind, it's obvious to you, it keeps your mind active. And that's one of the points that we need to keep remembering is that in Australia, we're in this curious position where we have this really diverse population with many, many languages being spoken with, a quarter of the people of our people speaking a language additional to English in the home. But we still have this monolingual mindset that English is the language of power and English is good, and very few people actually learn a language formally, another language formally in schools. And so we need to change that mindset and really acknowledge the project that parents and community language schools are involved in ensuring that our children develop bilingually. The issue of code switching is quite important because we notice that that's another area where parents are often uncertain, where children are switching and using different languages. And this is generally a good thing. I think it's important that children have a model to work towards, but the issue of code switching is something that happens in the classroom, I'm sure you know that, and it happens at home as well, and it's not something that should be jumped on and discouraged. It's just children finding the right word at the right time and then move on and let's get on with it, and it's actually quite productive. One study found where parents mix languages, so do children. Young children know early on who can use the language and how they can differentiate. Young children will, particularly in families say where one partner is not Vietnamese, they'll see maybe English as mummy's language and Vietnamese as daddy's language. They won't call it Vietnamese and English, but they'll be able to, very quickly they're able to identify which situations they use which language. And what we see now in our view of the brain now is that it's actually organic. It's not a machine, it's not a computer, it's organic. And when you have two languages, the two languages are working together and operating with each other and feeding off each other, making comparisons all the time. And that's the way we need to think about it. It's important that children maintain their home language at an age-appropriate level. And that is, again, comes to your work as community language teachers. So we see a lot of children who have a home language who stagnate at a certain level. So their language, they may be 18, but their language is still that of a 10 or 12-year-old because they haven't read, they haven't developed their language. And it's really, really important that development keeps going beyond puberty. And that's why that threshold threshold for language development is really important to attain that and maintain that and develop that. So we refer to that as the common underlying proficiency. And what that is talking about is that at that subterranean level, underneath, our work that we do in language is actually one thing. It's not, our brain isn't separated. We don't have a Vietnamese compartment and an English compartment. That's not the way it works. We have a compartment for language that's operating at that deeper level, and we're drawing on that all the time. If we're speaking Vietnamese, we'll be using what we learn from our processing of English as well. So it's one compartment, if you like, if you want to use that term, compartment. So the implications for your role is that parents need information on how to help and teach children, and they need reassurance. They need reassurance about the project they're involved in. And also, it's important that this bilingual project begins at an early age, and that it's encouraged from an early age. So we've seen many schools beginning playgroups on site, and we've seen that in our research as well. And playgroups are really productive areas. We're not talking about, and one of the things that I know from my research, and Criss Jones Diaz will back this up as well, I'm sure, is that playgroups are play. That kids learn through play, they learn through opportunities to engage in play through which they learn. It's not a school. So the emphasis is on play, not on school. But those environments are really productive for the interaction between mother or carer and child, and the interaction around the artefacts that they have in the room, and problem solving, things like that. So playgroups are really productive areas, especially for extending kids' language. It's often, too, an area where the carer and the child are away from the home and away from older siblings who might be using English, and there's this lack of stress there. So they're really great places, and really, I've found my research on playgroups to be really interesting in terms of the children's language development and the opportunities that can be provided. So, one of the things that you do in your community, one of the many things you do in terms of your work as community language teachers, is you provide a domain for use, for the language use. You provide an area where children can use Vietnamese. The school that I visited at Bankstown, as I said, it was transformed into this space where Vietnamese was spoken. It became a Vietnamese school because of the signs, the artefacts, all the things that those teachers did when they came into that school on a Saturday. It was just amazing. But that became an area where people use Vietnamese all the time. And so think about it, some of those children may not hear or speak Vietnamese during the week when they're away from that school. So that domain of use is really important. But to develop the language, children need other domains as well. And so the community provides a domain for use. There's virtual domain in terms of the internet, Skyping with relatives. Those kinds of things are really important. So there are a number of domains, if you like, of language use that are important to the Vietnamese community. Vietnamese communities, like where I live in Marrickville, for example. Thank goodness, we have some great restaurants there. But a very vibrant Vietnamese community as well. And I noticed the signs, the streetscapes, the interaction among my neighbours in Vietnamese tells me that the language is alive and providing opportunities for kids to hear and speak Vietnamese in that community. In the religious domain as well, of course, the temple and so on, the opportunity is there for Vietnamese to be used again, and internet and technology is growing in importance, particularly in terms of contact with grandparents who may not be in the same area, and grandparents are one of the greatest resources for maintaining the home language, and it's so important. The children want to connect with their grandparents, and they want to ensure that they communicate with them. In our research we found communication with grandparents is one of the main motivators for kids learning their home language, which is great. And also travel now is really important. Travel costs as much now in money terms as it did 20 years ago, so it's easy for kids to travel. I swore that I wasn't going to go over time, so I just want to very quickly touch on your work in the schools. One of the things you are doing, providing realistic goals and relevant materials. That's what community language schools need to do, and that's what you are doing. Your children are not, in some of them are second language learners. They might be speaking English at home. The pace of learning might need to go slower. They need to be, where they are with their language, needs to be acknowledged. Pathways for learning need to be provided, and one of the most important things that you as a group, the influence that you can bring to bear, is to make sure that your children are recognised, receive recognition for the work that they do. I know you do that, but it also needs to happen in the mainstream schools. The mainstream schools need to be know of the extra work these kids are doing on the weekend and after school, and that needs to be acknowledged as well. And it's really important that they get that acknowledgement, and the value-added activities that you do, the camps, the fairs, the food stalls, that's really important too. That's something that you're providing. And interacting with your children in the classroom, engaging them, being aware that language is a social event, that we learn the language by learning with others, is so important. And also the support of the community, which is another big factor that we found in your schools, that you have the support of parents in the work that you do, which is quite important. I'll have to stop there, unfortunately, but I would have a lot more to say about our research in your schools. But I think there are only a couple more things to say. One is great work that you're doing. Thank you very much. And also keep doing it. Keep going and stay there, and keep working hard, and keep providing that domain for language use that you are providing for your children. It's such an important opportunity.
Introduce her to everyone here today. Maria is Dr. Maria Lobstyna. She currently teaches at the New South Wales School of Languages in Sydney and is involved in ongoing research focusing on intercultural competence awareness in language teaching. Today she will speak about what we can learn from Finland, recent search findings and best practice language teaching. Tiến sĩ Maria Lobstyna là diễn giả tiếp theo cho chương trình hội nghị hôm nay. Hiện nay, tiến sĩ Maria đang giảng dạy tại trường ngôn ngữ New South Wales ở Sydney và góp phần vào việc nghiên cứu đặt trọng tâm trong lĩnh vực dạy ngôn ngữ theo đường hướng đa văn hóa. Hôm nay cô sẽ trình bày đề tài Chúng ta học hỏi được gì từ Phần Lan, những khám phá mới nhất và phương pháp dạy ngôn ngữ hiệu quả nhất.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for for coming to this talk. Why am I talking about Finland today? Firstly, because Finland, you know that in the world education context and in Australia, Finland is considered one of the most successful countries in terms of their education results. And Finland is doing extremely well on the international scale, like the PISA tests. So Finland is one of the top 3 countries, together with Singapore and Japan. And the Finnish educational system is nowadays a model for many countries globally and for Australia as well. But on the other hand, I wanted to talk about Finland because I can see I'm an outsider and I can only admire the Vietnamese culture and the in-depth, this very diverse and very in-depth cultural and linguistic heritage of Vietnam. And I thought it's very interesting because Finland and Vietnam share some similarities, because when we think about Vietnamese culture and this development of Vietnamese language from the ancient or old language from Nom to the more recent 18th century written language. And the very similar events happened in Finland, because in Finland there was also the ancient Finnish language, and then in the 19th century, under the Russian, when Finland was part of the Russian Empire, the linguists developed the new language which the Finns use now. But nowadays, what is very important for the Finns is how to preserve their spoken language. And I believe especially from today's presentations, that's also a very important issue for the Vietnamese educators today. So when we think about Finland and Vietnam, one of the main concerns of the Finnish educators nowadays is how to preserve the purity of Finnish spoken language, because it's hugely influenced by English. So I thought that I can make only just in a brief period of time a few points. How can we use the Finnish lessons? What can we discuss, or what can we learn from Finnish education in the bilingual context? And one of the main points is when we think about Finland, it's a small country, but still it's 5 million population. It's approximately the same size as New South Wales. And I'm not sure about Vietnam, how many people are in Vietnam nowadays. Oh, so that's much smaller than Vietnam. But probably like Vietnam, it's also situated at the crossroads of different cultures. Like Vietnam, it's surrounded by different neighbors. In the Finnish case, it's Russia on the one hand and Sweden on the other. So they were always influenced by many languages, and sometimes languages were forced, like Swedish and Russian. So to preserve their own language is very important for them, and they believe that's part of their educational success. They focus on Finnish language as their native language and on Finnish culture as well. When we think about Finland, the research that I refer to was done by Macquarie University. It's a group focused on this Finnish-Australian educational connections. And I went to Finland, so we interviewed teachers, we interviewed students, educators, teacher educators, and pre-service teachers of Finnish language, English as a foreign language, and other languages. And it was a very important point that we try to find some successful patterns in this teaching pedagogy that can be shared with any language. And when we refer to these successful patterns, one of them is, I'm just sharing what they believe worked for them and can work in the Australian multilingual education context. It's cultural aspect. So for the Finns, language is has very close connection with their culture, with their cultural heritage. So for their students, they encourage them, even then English is now really domineering language because you can't go and get a job in the world with Finnish. They believe that the emphasis is on the importance of Finnish culture, Finnish spirit, Finnish national heritage. And thus you can see that Australia and Finland, what do you notice? What do you think is in common between two countries? Small?
No.
Excuse me? They're like islands, they're isolated, really. In a way, they're isolated, both of them. Anything else?
The sea, the land.
Yes, they have their unique language structure because they're both quite remote. So we can see that in common it's large area, small population. It's very diverse because Finland originally, like in Australia, we have multicultural population. We have to bring other languages. To feel Australian, you have to be at least bilingual. And with the Finns, originally they had to be trilingual because Swedish and Russian were compulsory languages for them for 2 centuries. Because these were languages of education and government languages. And also what is common about Finland in this, when we talk about Finland, least corrupt, most heavy metal bands, music bands, most coffee, stable, a lot of milk, and most library books in the world, because they love reading. It's so cold, it's so dark, they spend their winters reading, and their children are encouraged to read a lot. And these are the images, probably the most common images of Finland. You can probably recognize what it is. Do you know? Yes, the Nokia phone that probably you remember. It was sold to Japan, but still with some Finnish shares. Anything else? Do you know this picture that all our children in Australia laugh about? Yeah. Angry Birds. And the movie Trolls, if you know the children's stories. And this is Sibelius, if you like music. Jan Sibelius is the famous Finnish composer. They're very proud of him. So from our perspective, everyone in Finland speaks multiple languages, and multilingualism is the norm, because also there are a lot of newcomers, new arrivals. Finland accepts a lot of migrants, so nowadays it's really a multicultural society, and they support their teachers, language teachers especially. So we believe that it's a heaven where the different languages are celebrated, and students take languages as elective subjects, and so teachers never really advocate for languages, but it's not the whole picture. And what is often when you, in the newspapers and current media, we always refer to the Finland educational miracle, or the Finnish lessons. But we can see that they also have own problems, despite of being on the top with the international testing. They still have struggle now with the very diverse classrooms, so the religious, ethnic issues within the classrooms that the Finns have to resolve. And so one of the main education researchers called Fred Durbin in Helsinki, he voiced this question that there is room and need for development because times are changing, even Finnish miracle is not working. And our study at Macquarie University was based on this comparative study. I will refer you to Finnish results today between Australian school system and Finnish school system based on language learning and the sense of identity. Because how do our students feel? Am I a German or am I an Australian? If I have German background, am I a Vietnamese or am I an Australian or Australian Vietnamese? Many of our students really, they struggle to find this sense of identity. And this is closely linked with whether they want really to learn language in depth or not. And the Finnish idea, the Finnish concept is that culture is linked with language learning. So they put this emphasis on language, intercultural learning. So I learn about my own heritage culture and I learn about Australian culture or Finnish culture, so they're brought together. With methodology, we used group interviews of students and teachers, and this presentation is focused on Finnish data. This is one of the major schools, because in Finland, many schools are linked with the universities. So the university pre-service teachers, young teachers, they come regularly, not only for their practical, they come regularly to visit the school. So there is this constant exchange of ideas. The educators come to secondary and primary school, and the research shows that students, if the school is situated close to the university, the students are more likely to develop this idea, I have to go to the uni. I have to get my high education, because they can observe it every day. And so that's the building where we took our research. And I want to refer to some students when we interviewed them. What the Finnish teachers introduced when teaching languages is it's not compulsory, but what they call cultural studies. We're talking probably about all the students, It's the same system, year 9, year 12, it's the secondary school, high school. So the students from year 9, they have units of cultural studies, and they're not compulsory, but the students of different levels, not necessarily the strongest, the brightest students, they have to produce a cultural portfolio. So they collect all this information about country of their language. And it could be just pictures, paintings, just a few words, but they do this research. They feel very proud that they have research skills, and the Finnish educators, they praise this. It's not compulsory, but many language students go for this cultural portfolio, and so they pass it to the teacher, and then they exchange it in the classroom as a classroom discussion. So that was one of the interesting discoveries that we made, that cultural competence, interest in this in-depth research, even at the basic level, if it's not a very strong student, helps them to gain this importance of language study. And also the textbooks, because there's not one textbook. The Finnish teachers use different language textbooks, and the students believe that it's very important to talk about, they learn language, but they say we learn this language, for example English, but so we can talk about Finland, about our native country or the country of our ancestors, so to teach people, English speakers, about our national heritage. So it gives them this goal in discussing the importance of this discussion. And also language teachers in Finland, they tend not to teach only grammar, but they teach different, even again at the basic level, subjects like, for example, disasters in the world, but that was about Japan, and or about nature, or about even some interesting job opportunities in this country of the language. And students like Hilda, for example, who was a very interesting Finnish student, she said that there's a lot of interactions, and speaking about different subjects brings this interest in learning languages, not only grammar, but different subject areas. That's portfolio independent learning, that students appreciate this freedom when they research subjects like politics or culture or history of the country of their language. And also we found that this curiosity about cultural differences, not limited only to grammar or to very strict grammar learning, also brings this extra dimension when students develop their sense of identity or their two identities. One of the students told us that culture is important. It helps us to understand what are people thinking. And so we can't only translate it. If we translate it into Finnish, she said, it sounds a bit strange, it's different. So what she was talking about is that sometimes some notions are impossible to translate, but it's very important for Finnish students, language students, to learn about different cultures and to preserve and be proud of their culture. And another aspect that unfortunately is difficult in Australia because we're so far away is exchange. So the Finnish teachers always strongly support students to travel. And when they come back, they said it's important if you share what did you find, what did you see in another country. Because many students are very shy, and unless the teacher, language teacher, encourages them, they will keep silent. Is it correct? Because they emphasize that unless the teachers ask, they will just never, they think that others would laugh or they would not be interested. But when they start speaking, when they travel, it's a different world and other students engage. They want to learn the language to travel and to discover themselves. And that's what we face as language teachers every day. One of the students who told us that pretty much the whole Western world is becoming one unified culture. So different features of different cultures are fusing together. It is not just the Finnish or just the American culture, everything is together. So on the one hand, it's a positive aspect because we are becoming closer as different nations. On the other hand, it's a danger because we the students lose their identity because they lose their language and heritage. So that was also the concern of some teachers we interviewed, that you see the future of language teaching and learning in decline in many ways, and they said we have hard time because of English influence, and many students believe that English is enough. So that's to finish these reflections and sharing with you the Finnish teachers their pedagogical methods to encourage students via cultural studies, searching for their identity, discussing in the classroom. They said it's important to bring into the classroom, again, even a simple discussion, what's on news in this country, if they learn French or if they learn Japanese, what's discussed, what's new. So they said that this development, what's current, is very important for their language students. And you can see that this is the Department of Teacher Education in Finland. I wanted to show you. What do you think about it? When you enter, that's the first thing you see in the hall. So you can see the stair, almost like a staircase, but the students, the teachers, they can sit there and they can talk. They can discuss their ideas. So it's the open space, because I thought when today there was part of the discussion was about the beautiful design of the classrooms, and that's exactly what the Finns offer. It's beautiful, modern, and people can exchange, students can exchange information with their teachers. Teachers can talk to each other, they can talk to students, it's open, it's transparent. That's exactly, I thought it's wonderful, it's the same concept of the beautiful design. So they said that the Finns said more focus on what you can do with language rather than just using the traditional patterns of pedagogy. And so that's probably the main issues would be also creative thinking, social responsibility, because they believe that it's important to raise students' cultural and social awareness by bringing news from the country of language learning, by discussing why it is important to you, and what does it mean in the global contemporary environment. So one of the young language teachers told us that she insists that her students discuss news. In this case, she's a French teacher, French news, because they want to know what happens. They need to know what happens. And her teacher's duty is just to bring it to the classroom discussion. So what are our takeaway observations? That Finland language learning starts, we're talking about the second language, the third language, very early in year 2. And it's very important part of national global citizenship. The teachers encourage students to think, unless you have a second language, you can't be part of the global context. With only English, it's not enough. You would fit in. So this is a pedagogy for a critical approach to learning, and interculturally, which is quite poorly understood probably now, cultural heritage is vital. And to finish, this is the new building, Center for Applied Linguistic and for Language Learning, again in Finland. So you can see that it's very modern, and the idea is very transparent, open for discussion. That's why they make it glass walls. They emphasize the world is global and it's open. Let's start this dialogue. Thank you so much.
Discourse at that time around the benefits and the importance of languages learning. My parents didn't think that was appropriate for me, so I was not encouraged. But I did go overseas when I had trained as a teacher to live in Latin America to learn Spanish. And when I got to Latin America, one of my major preoccupations was to actually learn to speak the language. I didn't want to continue speaking English to me. So here I am today, a long time later, and I work now in this area, and my passion for this has really been triggered by my own personal experiences growing up and now growing my children up with semi-success as bilingual Spanish-English speakers. So I want to talk to you about the benefits of maintaining a home language and or learning a second language. And so, but before we do that, I want to explore this concept of multi or bilingualism, okay, and what it means to be bilingual. And then look at those various benefits that are just not cultural. They're linguistic, they're intellectual, and they're social. And then I want to just, if I have time, share some of my research findings with you where I asked kids what they thought about it, how was their experience, because I think often we forget to ask children, what is it like? I don't know what it's like as a bilingual child because I was not one. But I know from my children's experiences that it's not always, they're not often encouraged, okay? And I think as language teachers, one of our primary roles is to advocate, not just for the teaching of your language, but the teaching of all languages. If we are going to be a truly successful, globalised, multicultural country, our citizens all need to be able to speak more than one language. And unfortunately, while in Australia today, 20% of Australians are bi or multilingual, the vast majority are not, even though we have something like over 300 languages spoken here. So we have a long way to go. But let's firstly just have a look at this notion of bilingualism or multilingualism. Many, many years ago, there was a very kind of conservative approach to what it meant to be bilingual, which was that you had to be extremely well balanced in the languages you spoke. So this is very old research of the 1950s and 60s. You weren't considered bilingual unless you had equal competence. So it was very much, languages were very much seen as discrete parts of the human, of the vocabulary that are human, of the repertoire. Today, we don't look at it so much as discrete parts, as language being discrete parts, but that we perform our language skills as a repertoire in different contexts. So today we think about multilingualism and bilingualism in a kind of much more holistic context-based approach. So that a young child growing up bilingual or multilingual may not be fluent in English because English is the dominant language in Australia, but will be fluent in different repertoires. And what we want to do as teachers is to always find opportunities to develop that fluency more and work with what they have, work with what they bring to the classroom. So what we know though from the research from many years now is that bilingual children, and when I say bilingual I mean multilingual children as well, have diverse linguistic and cultural knowledge, skills, resources and potential. And those four benefits, if you like, are all generated from the child's experience of growing up or learning a second language. So when you learn a second language, you all of a sudden you have to do some kind of metacognitive thinking about how you process language. And very young children have an advantage over adults in that regard because their brain is being stimulated as they do that kind of meta-linguistic thinking. So when we talk about diverse, we want to celebrate that bilingual children in a classroom, say in an English language classroom, they will bring to English a set of experiences that they've gained from learning to speaking Vietnamese, for example. So the linguistic and cultural knowledge is really important. Knowledge around cultural practice, knowledge around linguistic practice. And we could, there's a whole discussion there, and I'm sure you guys have lots of examples. The skills is about how young children and adults learn to switch their languages or learn to do what we call translanguage or transfer their languages, whatever their languages are, in whatever context. So to know that a young child, to know that, well, at daycare I speak English to this person, but I know that I can speak Vietnamese to the teacher in the preschool room. And I know that because of the relationship I have. So when you're a very young child, knowing who to speak to and when to not use that language is a skill that the brain, that young children learn. And that's a really amazing thing to learn when you're 2 and 3. My son, when he was 18 months, he knew, actually it was Vietnamese that he asked, was the first language he asked about. He knew that there were other languages because he spoke Spanish, but he heard Vietnamese being spoken on the bus. And he asked me, is that a language? And he was only 18 months old. He was a very articulate child. He had very advanced language skills, and he still does. That was amazing for me because how did he know? I didn't tell him that, oh look, there's these people in the front seat speaking Vietnamese. I never told him that. He just knew that they were using language to make meaning with each other because he doesn't. So this is a context, knowledge, skill. And the resources, therefore, and the potential are limitless. And what we have to do, what our job as teachers and principals is to advocate for these things so that our students can go forward and become potentially bilingual and multilingual adults. So when we look specifically at the research then, it's very highly connected to self-esteem and cultural identity. Children feel good about themselves if they are encouraged and told that being bilingual is good. They grow up feeling healthy. They grow up with strong self-esteem and a cultural identity that they know is beyond, is something that you never want to lose. They learn that there are different ways of doing and being and believing, and that these different ways are not like they are contextual. So the socio-cultural knowledge, that they can compare the cultural practices of their home to the mainstream practices and to other practices. And in a multicultural global society, this ability to appreciate and share cultural difference is really essential. One of the big advantages or benefits that really speak to us as educators is that there are linguistic and intellectual advantages in learning languages and maintaining your home language. I saw this first sight in my own children. I mean, this is why I became so passionate, because as a young mother of 2 boys growing up learning Spanish and English, I could see their brains light up when they switched between languages and the benefits that Spanish gave them. Even today, I can see those benefits in them as young men. They're both highly creative individuals. So we live in a very culturally diverse world, suburb, city, community, street. What we need to be doing as global citizens is appreciating that diversity. And unfortunately, in the discourse that you hear about, spoken by multiple politicians and people talking about multiculturalism, language is never, ever, ever discussed. We have bilingual politicians that don't say what their language is. We know the Premier of New South Wales speaks Polish, but she doesn't come out with it. So when we talk about multiculturalism, we often don't want to talk about languages. And that to me is a problem, because we know that those two go hand in hand. So there's lots of research out there about these benefits, and our role, again, is to communicate these benefits to our families. The benefits relate to family links, to identity, to the linguistic and cultural gains, society and self-esteem. And we'll track these 5 things. I will track these as I go through my presentation. And this is why the home language, whether it's Vietnamese, or Spanish, or Italian, or Arabic, is really important. So let's have a look at family links. I always start from the family because as a young child growing up, young children growing up in a family that there's other languages spoken, this is where they use their home language the most. The home is the place where children will get their first language. So the home language plays a key role in building positive relationships and interactions between families. Again, I had that experience with my youngest child. English is my first language, but I spoke Spanish to my second child. By the time he got to kindergarten, his Spanish was getting almost as good as mine. And I was starting to struggle. Just in that basic one-to-one, his Spanish was so good, you know? It was almost as good as mine. He was balanced at 5 years of age. So what we need to do is encourage our parents. Speak Vietnamese at home. That's your role. If that's one good thing you do as a parent, you don't need to speak English. Unfortunately, today I hear grandmoms speaking English to their children. And I want to go over and I want to say, stop! You have an amazing linguistic resource there that will die in your family if you don't do something about it. So we need to get that message down. So what often occurs though in Australian migrant families is that children grow into these families, the parents speak the home language, the children go to school, and the children speak English to each other and to their parents. And so if those kids are lucky, the parents will continue to speak the language and they might receive the language but not speak it. If they're really lucky, they might go to community language school and they might really insist that they only speak, you know, Vietnamese Spanish at home. But we know that there's a lot of language shift and language loss. And unfortunately, this does cause family relationships between the parents and the children. We also know that there is negative familial, psychological and social implications when the home language is not spoken between the parents and the grandparents and the children. And there was some research done back in 1991 and by Wong Fillmore, and she researched Korean and Spanish families, and she found that in the families that were less functional or less cohesive, with more problems, were the ones where the home language was not spoken. So if you want to keep your family together and you want your kids to be connected to you and your family and your culture, that the language is the central platform where that can occur. One of the next reasons for me, and again, I'm kind of placing these reasons first that are important to me, but they may not be as important to you, but we'll look at that later. Identity plays a key role. Language is a significant marker of our identity. I remember when I was overseas teaching Spanish in Dominican Republic, and people would come up to me and say, oh, you speak good American. And it would really, really upset me when my English was, when people would look at me and say, I speak American. That's not my identity. I'm not good American. So we look at our language and our culture and we can see that there's a relationship. The marker of your identity, or the showpiece of your identity is language. And so this is often where kids who are not encouraged to have a strong cultural identity will stop speaking their language. So, questions of identity are linked to how we understand ourselves and others. When we understand ourselves, we can understand others better. In early childhood, children's identity construction is continuing. It's a work in progress. It's undergoing constant change and renegotiation. Language learning is part of this. Again, language is learning. Often in child development theory, in Piaget's developmental theory, he talks about language development as if it's a singular thing. But for bilingual kids, there are 2 languages operating. And so when we're looking at the languages learning of children, we need to understand that those children who are learning more than one language are learning more than one language in different ways than a monolingual. They've got more work to do. And because they've got more work to do, their brain is more stimulated. But we don't, well, the mainstream surely does not acknowledge that. Often bilingual kids are seen as deficit because it's English, they're judged on their ability to speak English, when in fact they might speak 2 or 3 languages and dialects at home and in their community. Being bilingual means you have more than one identity, and it means that you crisscross between those identities. Again, I see that in my kids. I saw how they would shift between their Anglo-Australian identity and their Dominican, Latin American Dominican identity, and they would really want to flesh that out as young children. They would often ask about that. So language, identity, and culture are connected in very many ways. And in our diverse community, we need to appreciate that. She's getting out the box of chocolates, which means my time is up. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip to this slide, which is where I think we need to focus, just for the last remaining minute. What the research tells us is that bilingual children and adults develop what is called metalinguistic awareness, this ability to analyse and critique and deconstruct language. Bilinguals have greater awareness than monolinguals, and the research shows this in 3-year-olds. The good news is that this comes from your home language or from the language you learn, extra language. The bad news is once you stop learning and speaking your home language, you stop that the metalinguistic awareness is decreased. Don't keep it. It's like you've got to top up your metalinguistic awareness. It happens to me. If I don't speak Spanish for a week, my brain starts to go a bit foggy because it really keeps my brain working. So in Australia we have a diverse community, and what we want is that we want to see languages centred at the piece, at the centre of all of these cultural capitals, if you like, that we have to offer the world. And the ability to use a third, second language in trade, in business, is of immense value to Australia. We are yet to really acknowledge that, I believe. There's a new research now, and I'm pleased about this because I can see it again in my kids, that I believe their creativity, their music and their creativity is related to the fact that they were brought up bilingual. So we're not just looking at this as a linguistic advantage, but we're also looking at the intellectual advantages as well. So my time's up.
You're going to start eating the chocolate.
Okay. I'm sorry I didn't get through it all, but you do have, I think they have. That's on the reason handouts over there for you. Okay, all right, I got it. So thank you very much. Time is short.